Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to our Lawrence School Board Candidate Forum, sponsored jointly by the Lawrence Branch Naacp, Black 30, Loud Light. My name is Ursula Miner. I'm president of the Lawrence Branch Naacp. The Naacp partnership with Black 30 and Loud Light is very compatible since our organizations are nonpartisan. Our political activities are focused on voter registration, voter education, and most importantly, voter turnout at the polls. Today's forum offers a special opportunity to ask the candidates questions that are of interest to the communities we represent. Thanks to all the members and volunteers from our organizations who helped prepare for these forums. A special thank you to the Kansas Black Leadership Council and Target for their financial support of today's event. Now let's review this afternoon's format for our candidates in the audience. The questions I will ask were developed by NAACP, Black 30, and Loud Light members. Each candidate received the questions in advance. Each candidate will have a specific amount of time to answer the questions. Our timekeeper will let each candidate know where there are 15 seconds left to respond, and then the time is up. We respectfully ask that the candidates stay within the time allotted for each question. I will rotate who gives the first answer for each question. Then the next person will answer, and so on. The seating arrangement we have today was determined randomly by drawing names. There will be no additional questions from the audience. Instead, we have asked the candidates to stay after the formal question and answer period so that they can visit with them. The NAACP, Black 30, and Loud Light cannot endorse candidates, but the candidates are free to share campaign materials, seek volunteers, and answer additional questions informally. Now let me introduce our school board candidates. In order as seated is Carol Cadu Blackwood, G.R. Gordon Ross, Yolanda Franklin, Rachel Stunlingbear, Brandon Moore, Ann Costello, and Jody Meyer, who are running for 4-year positions. Then we have Ariel Miner and Shannon Kimball, who are running for 2-year terms. Thank you for your participation. Edward Gonzalez is unable to be here and has asked that we read the following statement. I wanted to extend my heartfelt gratitude for your understanding and support regarding the absence from the recent school board forum. The passing moment of my beloved grandmother was an emotionally challenging moment for my family and me. I deeply appreciate your compassion during this time. As a candidate for change in our school district, my commitment to striving for equality and advocating for higher wages for all staff remains unwavering. I firmly believe that every individual within our educational community should have the opportunity to thrive, and I'm dedicated to working towards a more inclusive and equitable school system. My passion for this cause is further fueled by the fact that I'm a parent of 4 children in our district. 2 of them have special needs, and this personal experience has given me a profound understanding of the unique challenges and opportunities within our school system. I am determined to ensure that every child, regardless of their abilities or background, receives the quality and education they deserve. Once again, thank you for your understanding and support. I am eager to continue working together to bring a positive change in our school district and make it a place that every student and staff member can thrive. You can find more out about me at edwardscampaignsite.com. Kevin Coronado's name will not be on the ballot. However, he has withdrawn from his candidacy. His name will be on the ballot. However, he is withdrawn from the candidacy. Okay, we will start with question number 1. What would be your response if a parent or community member challenges curriculum or library materials? We will begin with Carol Cadu Blackwood. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. The district adopted opt-out forms for such such responses if a parent objects to their student being if they don't want to partake in that type of curriculum. The Kansas Supreme Court in the Gannon versus Kansas decision wrote that their adequacy requirement is met when the public education financing system provided by the legislature for K through 12 through structured implementation is reasonably calculated to have all Kansas public education students meet or exceed the standards set out in Rose. As a board member, I will continue to enforce the Rose standard, specifically number 5, which states grounding in the arts to enable them to appreciate their cultural and historical heritage. I will continue to advocate for public schools to teach the truth. The Kansas State Board of Education says that the Rose standards guide its work in overseeing public schools to focus on helping students acquire life skills and prepare for academics and careers. Thank you.
Next we have G.R. Gordon Ross.
I recently supported revisions that we made to board policy IF, which sets out a process by which parents and guardians can bring challenges to curriculum and materials. And the revisions that we made outline that process and make it somewhat restrictive, but not so restrictive, because we do want to hear if we have curriculum that impedes our ability to do our equity work or impacts the identity or affects individual children. But I will say that I do stand against the banning of books and the banning of curriculum, which is why I supported the revisions to that policy. Any member of the community that is not a parent or a guardian who shares those concerns, I would invite them to come and present those concerns during board commentary at the school board meeting.
Next we have Yolanda Franklin.
I will let them know that their concerns do matter, and we as a school board are listening to them. This question reminds me of the Parents' Bill of Rights that the governor recently vetoed. This bill was trying to implement to give the parents control over what curriculum was taught in schools and what decisions on whether to have such items removed at their discretion. I will also advise them that in Kansas, even though each school district develops their own curriculum, it's the teachers that decide how they will provide instruction to the students. So we must trust the teachers and the staff to make these informed decisions on what has been presented to them to be utilized to educate our children.
Next we have Rachel Stumbling Bear.
So I have a library and information science degree, and so I know that it is crucial to have a collection development policy in place that is a guide for what curriculum and library materials are purchased. And in fact, as Gordon Ross mentioned, the school board did 2 reads this summer of this updated policy, which they called IF, this summer. And in there is a complaint challenge procedure in place. So if a parent approached me, I would see where they are in that process. I can also explain to them why the complaint procedure starts with the teacher, media specialist, or principal. A challenge to materials is not a bad thing. It is always good to double check ourselves about why we have or are using a certain material. But in light of the book banning craze across the US, I would explain to them that just because you want something removed does not mean it will be, especially if it was purchased in good faith according to our collection development policy.
Next we have Brandon Moore.
Yeah, I agree. We need to allow our teachers and building administrators to make decisions within their 4 walls. If a family has a fundamental belief that contradicts with a lesson or material that's being taught that falls under protected categories, an alternative assignment should be considered for that, but not just because that they don't like the material that's being taught. We need to make sure that our students are getting a diverse education.
Next we have Ann Costello.
So books dealing with race, racism, sex, gender, and sexuality are often the targets of challenges. These books being challenged are often by marginalized communities or written by marginalized communities. Research has shown that nationwide complaints are largely driven by a few number of people. In 2021 to 2022, 11 people were responsible for 60% of book challenges nationwide that were tracked by PEN America. One man alone filed 92 challenges. I don't agree with book banning, but I do believe that parents have a right. However, that right is strictly pertains to their child and not to everyone else's child. They cannot opt everyone else's child out of that lesson. We do have established policy that I believe should be followed, not only in determining what books are appropriate to be taught, but also when a challenge arises, they have that right to do that and follow that procedure.
One of the greatest gifts my parents ever gave me was love of public libraries and the ability to read whatever I wanted to. That being said, there may be times where it's appropriate for somebody to take up an issue with material. And let's be clear, it's not just about LGBTQ materials or other materials. I think there are some that you might find objectionable if certain members or groups try to put them in the library, or a teacher might take certain viewpoints in a class. I would adhere to district policy and encourage the complainant to take it up with a teacher or library specialist, and then with the building principal, and then in accordance with district policy, report it to the superintendent. And just to be clear, even though the school board recently changed the policy that we've been handling for a number of years, I confirm with Julie Boyle, there have been no formal material challenges or requests for review in the last 5 years. That's the time frame I asked for. So this has not been a problem in USD 497.
Next time, line closer.
As an elected board member, I would listen to that member of the public and direct them to the compliance coordinator, and then I would move on. I don't have a lot of patience for book bans or challenging curriculum, especially the erasure of our American history. I look to teachers and librarians to be the authority on the materials in their classrooms and on the library shelves. I'm part of Kansans United for Public Schools, which is a grassroots movement working to fight the bigotry and the discrimination that is rampant across our country right now. I believe that we need a movement to make actual change in our systems. I think the community should be able to have engagement about materials for sure, and opportunity to communicate, but ultimately I leave that to the teachers and librarians.
So as a parent, I know that it's my job to impart my values to my children, but I do not expect that my values should rule everything that happens in the classroom or in a library in one of our public schools. It's appropriate that we're answering this question today, as it's the last day of Banned Books Week. Efforts to ban books in school and public libraries reached a record high in 2022, and the American Library Association is saying that they are on pace to exceed that for 2023. We're facing a growing crisis in education and elsewhere around the ideas of academic freedom, accurate history, and critical thinking. I was pleased to work with my board colleague Kelly Jones to make changes to our board policy so that we would have a strong policy in our district to deal with these circumstances. As a board member, I would encourage parents and community members to follow that policy, and I will always err on the side of trusting our professional educators' judgment about what materials are appropriate for our students. Thank you.
Next, we'll go to question number 2. How do school finance statutes impact school board decisions? We will start with Gordon Ross.
Understanding school finance laws are crucial for board members because those laws, and specifically how the legislature implements them, is imperative because it impacts all the work that we do. For instance, this last school year, the underfunding of special education cost our district almost $4 million from our general fund that we had to use to cover special education services. That's money that we could have used to help reduce class sizes, wages, or add additional programming. It's important because we as board members need to grasp those policies. We need to grasp how those policies impact the work that we do, the mill levies, and the taxing authority that we have, and how those all play together as we put together a budget, and how we understand things like budget authority, enrollment, and total calculated in enrollment as we do our job.
Next, we will have Yolanda Franklin.
We are responsible for our local budget. Yes, we do get funding from the state, and yes, we know that SPED is severely underfunded. But we are still responsible for our local budget. We know that state laws have to be followed, and we know that these laws limit us on our decisions. So we need to continue to work to get our schools fully funded at the state level. But we also need to be making sure we're keeping the funds equitable between our schools and keep our dollars close to our kids. For example, why is one school having to do fundraisers for school equipment and another school is getting theirs funded through the district? This is why we need a people-funded, people-powered movement to make sure our funding goes to our students.
Next, we have Rachel Stumbling-Bear.
So the school finance statutes tell us the formula for the school funding and in what ways schools can raise money and how much schools can raise through taxes. Based on how much money we receive determines where we need to focus to cover our costs. The main things in the budget are staff wages and the employer insurance costs, building maintenance, utilities, special education programs, food for breakfast and lunch, technology costs, etc. And for me, as somebody who would like to be on the school board decisions, I would want to make sure that our students are receiving, or the funds that are going towards our students, and making sure that they are getting the education that they need.
Next, we have Brandon Moore.
Yeah, the statutes play a huge role in our budget, and it's a lot more than anybody can explain in 60 seconds. My main concern is the current funding for base aid for student excellence, which is what the state uses to fund us, is $4,846. In 1992, it was $3,600. If you adjust that for inflation, we should be getting $7,878.07. Doing the math, that's a difference of $4,278.07. We're not going to be able to fix that overnight with the legislature, so we've got to learn how to do more with less. I'm sure most of us in here, over the course of the last few years, have learned how to do more with less. A little bit more mac and cheese and hot dogs every once in a while, and driving a bit less. So we have to learn to buckle down as a district as well, and to make smart decisions with our money, and we're not always doing that. So we need to be able to be more focused.
Next, we have Ann Costello.
So the board must live within the constraints that have been set by the legislature. In that regard, finance statutes impact nearly every budget decision that's made. To begin with, some funds can be republished, but those that are levied cannot. Since those funds cannot be republished, the general fund must be published at a higher rate than anticipated expenditures. And if we initially publish too low and then try to republish higher later, the levy would be less than the 33% and we'd lose state funding. This is just one example. The state determines the base aid per pupil, and like Brandon said, the legislature has consistently underfunded education, in part by keeping that low. It would take a 55% increase in base aid from the 1992 level, when adjusted for inflation, to just be equal to that amount of money. The legislature, as many have said, doesn't fund special education at their statutorily required level, and we are borrowing from general fund to cover. I will continue to advocate for our schools, our school district, for funding at the state, local, and national levels, and I encourage the community to do the same. We need to better organize as a collective to improve and advocate for funding in Topeka.
Next, we have Jody Meyer.
School finance statutes impact probably every aspect of a school board decision. The school finance statutes control how much money we receive from the state, how much we can raise locally, and they control the manner in which we are permitted to use that money. I think that taxpayers and the public sometimes don't understand when they see a gross dollar amount, how we can use it or why we can't use it for certain purposes. We are limited in the way we can spend that money. For example, under state law, schools can only spend at-risk funding on evidence-based programs that are approved by the State Board of Ed and backed by peer-reviewed research that shows improved outcomes for at-risk students. The state does audits on these things and recently noticed that money in some school districts wasn't used appropriately. For example, office supplies with at-risk funds, TVs, food, CM memberships, et cetera. So, when we think about how we have to budget for each category of items, we're limited by the statutes and what they allow us to spend money on in certain categories. Thank you.
Next, we have Ariel Minor.
We are certainly limited by state finance laws, and we are still very underfunded in SPED, which removes money from our general fund and limits us, absolutely. But we also need to be fiscally responsible locally. We do not have to spend money on consultants to the level we do. We do not have to send our money to other states like Boston for virtual school advertising. We don't have to make those choices. We don't have to pay administrators the salaries we pay. We don't have to pay the superintendent the salary we pay. We have to be more responsible with our funds and keep our dollars as close to our students and our teachers and our classrooms as possible. Thank you.
Next, we have Shannon Campbell.
So as other candidates have mentioned, school finance statutes have an enormous impact on the work that we do as a board in this area. We are constrained in a multitude of ways by the rules that are in place and also by the rules that say how we can spend that money. For example, base state aid per pupil. If we want to reduce class sizes across our district, we have to figure out how to rearrange the dollars that we're getting. We're not allowed to go out and raise taxes to achieve those ends. So decisions as a board are often about how do we meet the goals that we have when making difficult decisions, and how do we weigh the different values that are at play in trying to decide how to allocate those resources. That's where my experience and expertise on the board has been really valuable over the last several years. It's important when you're trying to figure out how to be equitable in using those resources. Part of our responsibility is to look at the system as a whole, and you cannot insist that one part of the system function poorly and expect good outcomes for students. Thank you.
Next, we have Carol Purdue Blackwood.
Thank you. I would like to echo what my colleague has said, Brandon Moore, about we need to be doing more with less. And I like the analogy of eating a little more hot dogs in my house. It's a lot more peanut butter to stretch our dollars. But I have advocated in Topeka for public schools, and I've advocated to the council for the White House for public education, for Indian education. And I think that we all can agree that we need to urge our lawmakers to stop siphoning away public dollars, tax dollars, into private schools. For example, we need to have greater communication with our community partners. The Douglas County Commission approved a Lakota language heritage grant for the Limestone Community School. The USD 497 School Board closes schools and other communities build schools. The Limestone School gives hope to neighborhoods like East Lawrence, where I grew up. The school was created by a former USD 497 educator to provide an alternative learning. Alternative learning. To date, we don't have any indigenous languages in USD 497, and yet we have Haskell Indian Nations University. We can develop a stronger partnership with Haskell that mirrors the JAG blueprint. Thank you.
Next, we'll go to question number 3. What is your plan for improving academic outcomes for minority students? We will start with Yolanda Franklin.
We have been fighting. We've been fighting for academic acceptance since schools was desegregated in 1954. 69 years. 69 years we've been fighting to not be considered just an afterthought in the public school system. So my plan is to try to put more of us in some of these decision-making roles. To see about offering more free mental health services to our minority students. And to help establish and implement an academic curriculum centralized more towards them and their unique learning needs.
Next, we'll have Rachel Studlingbear.
I know many of our schools have made goals over this year and the next 2 years to work on this issue. As a school board member, I would like to drill deeper into how they are working on these goals. What are the plans behind them? We need more mentorship programs. And I know the school district just recently announced a partnership called One Initiative that will work on reading, but we also need mentorship programs to focus on math and science. This is also where it's important to redesign our curriculum to reach the students. Sometimes putting application into practice or explaining a concept using different words can open that window of understanding. And we need to know where our students are starting from. We can't ask someone who is working on fractions to suddenly do geometry.
Next we'll have Brandon Moore.
This was a tough question for me. I may be the standard white male up here, but I have a very diverse family. My stepdad is an African American male. I have 2 stepbrothers, which I just call my brothers, that have 6 kids between them. So my nieces and nephews are all African American children, and they live in lower income neighborhoods in Lawrence. And they went to these lower income schools that got closed. And 2 of them are on IEPs. And we closed their neighborhood schools. And now we're trying to figure out why they're struggling at school. And it baffles me. Why are we closing these neighborhood schools with higher minority students and they don't have good outcomes? Why didn't we look at closing the West Side schools? Why are we not adding diversity to East Side schools that can naturally increase scores for our minority students? When schools are better integrated, everyone wins.
Next we have Ann Costello.
Our schools need to develop a culture of authentic care that is grounded in compassion, discipline, and high expectations. It includes the acceptance of students' cultural backgrounds, values, beliefs, and ways of being. The instruction should be student-centered in that it's culturally responsive, appropriate, compatible, and relevant. We also need to develop cultural competency in our teachers and staff. This involves developing personal and interpersonal awareness and sensitivities. It will help teachers successfully teach students whose cultures are different. It does take time to develop, though. We must value diversity and practice self-reflection, engage wholeheartedly with students, families, and communities as we take part in transformative actions that can actually lead to change. Other important steps are to improve small group instruction and strengthen the connection between home and school. Many studies have shown a direct relationship between student achievement and an involved and informed community. As a district, we need to do a better job of engaging our community. I'd like to see more opportunities for conversations between us and the community, not just commentary at board meetings, but actual conversations. Thank you.
Next we have Jody Meyer.
Jody, hold it closer.
Sorry, I'm not holding it close enough most of the time. I feel like this is a topic that has been discussed now for some years, and I don't really know what has been done. I would note that at the recent school board meeting where we discussed truancy, that it was noted that Native American or Alaska Native and Black students were the most chronically absent racial subgroups, with 46% of Native American or Alaska Native students chronically absent and 38% of Black students. According to the Native American Student Services website, NAASC serves around 530 students. So doing this math, 244 of those students are chronically absent. Are we focusing like a laser beam on getting these kids to school? If they're not in the building, the other outcomes aren't going to improve. I think that's something that teachers have said time and time again, is they have to be there in order to improve in other domains. If they're not in the building, have we obtained the data on why they're not there? I didn't hear that at the truancy meeting. If not, why not? Where are we on getting these students in their seats? Do we have a targeted approach to improving academics and specifically focusing on their IEPs and 504 plans? So that, I think, needs to be the focus, is getting them there and then working on the academic component.
Next we have Ariel Minor.
So just 160 years ago, it was a crime to teach Black people to read and write. Only 160 years ago. And we are still failing them. I have a minority student. My oldest son is multiracial, and I can tell you that we're still failing these students in our schools. His friends. What we can do is focus on low class sizes. We know, we have data that says that smaller class sizes help our minority students most. Staffing stability. I think that we need to have less turnover in our district because students need to know they can trust their teachers. When we are constantly getting new staff, you cannot build those relationships that are built on trust. And we know that we have to have trust in order to have an open mind to learn, especially for our minority students.
Next, we have Shannon Kimball.
To improve our outcomes, we cannot take our focus away from looking at the data and acknowledging what it tells us. I think that we have made a specific, focused effort to do that in this district. It has been sustained over a number of years. It is reflected in board policy. It is reflected in the discussions we have at board meetings. And we are seeing progress. This last year, our graduation rates held steady or increased in all of our subgroups for our minority students and otherwise. We are seeing increases in state assessment scores in our subgroups for our minority students as well. It is admittedly not as much progress as we would like to see, but we are getting there because the things that we are doing around rigorous instruction, academic opportunities, encouraging students to take challenging classes, culturally relevant curriculum, those things are working, and we need to continue that sustained focus, and I will do that as a board member as I have been doing for the past 12 years. Thank you.
Next, we have Carol Canoe-Blackwood.
Thank you. I think the most fiscally responsible thing to do would be to work alongside in partnership with the Douglas County Health Department to create an equity impact analysis to see how the school closures have impacted our neighborhoods where we close the schools. This has the potential to reduce costs, provide intercultural proficiency to better understand and value the cultural needs, background and experience of our BIPOC, LGBTQ plus 2S students. Pushing people out of these neighborhoods can change the composition of the neighborhoods and drive families out, creating greater gentrification. We need to have greater input from the community and come together to build trust and find some agreement on what is best for the community that I call my hometown. We need to invest in those students in schools who are falling behind, or in buildings that we say are underutilized rather than starve them out and close them. I think that where we could begin is working with the health department. Thank you.
Next, we have G.R. Gordon Ross.
I think in order to improve academic outcomes, we need to continue the work that we've done over the last few years, which is a two-pronged approach. We need to look at the data that we have. We need to evaluate that data, but we also need to actually talk to the students, and we need to get the students' lived experience with what we've been doing. And we need to look at where the data, where we were, where we're going, and where we want to be, and then adjust accordingly. We need to make sure that the work that we're doing is actually taking us in the right direction. And as Shannon said, we are headed in the right direction, maybe not as quickly as we want to get there, but we are seeing improvements. And as we analyze that data, as we look at specific things related to our strategic plan, like reading comprehension by the third grade, math readiness by the eighth grade, and as we implement things, we also need to be willing to involve those groups impacted in those decisions, and make sure that anything that we implement, if it's not working, to try something else.
Next, we have question number 4. What role does implicit bias have in the Lawrence educational system, and what would be your solution to solve this issue? We will start with Rachel Stumlingbear.
So implicit bias is an unacknowledged bias that affects judgments, behaviors, and attitudes, and we all have them. In order to change this, we have to learn what our biases are, so we have to do the work. For a school setting, that means school board members and staff need to undergo training to find out what their biases are and how to recognize them, and then to continue a training of how to remove those biases from our thoughts and actions and put those actions into place. And to follow up, we need to be working with our diverse population of our students and families to find out how they feel in our schools. They are telling us, and we're not always hearing, and that is a problem. We need to set up a reporting system where students and staff can report incidences and we need to set clear and firm expectations of what behaviors are appropriate.
Next, we have Brandon Moore.
Unfortunately, implicit bias never go away. But awareness and education can help reduce and make you aware of it so that you can help it reduce and keep it from driving decision making. Just a quick poll. How many people have to watch a video for training at work? Yeah, I see a lot of people. How many people actually pay attention to that video or just click through it? Yeah, most of us, right? We can't do some type of program that's going to give the teacher or the paraprofessional or the food service worker a video to watch. This needs to be live in-person training taught by somebody who is experienced in this that knows how to do that training, right? That's what's going to be able to help us learn what your biases are and learn how to be able to put those aside so that you can be the best version of you, to not have those impact your teaching and your viewpoints of how to be able to interact.
Next, we have Ann Costello.
So implicit bias can create barriers to opportunity and achievement for some students. It can make them more likely to face suspension or expulsion than their peers and less likely for them to be screened for gifted services. There are many ways we can combat this. First, we as a district need to increase the diversity of teachers and school leaders. Having more leaders of color could help change the structures that perpetuate these biases, and representation matters. It's important for students to see themselves reflected in the adults that are guiding their education. As a district, we can use data to uncover the trends of disparate treatment of individuals that may otherwise go unnoticed. Next, we need to reflect on our own biases. There are tools and trainings available that can help identify our biases. We should also solicit feedback from outsiders and/or students to determine if unconscious biases are manifesting. It's important to ask ourselves to consider situational circumstances that could have impacted a student's behavior rather than our own stereotype. We should encourage one another to take these reflective steps. It is critical to identify and acknowledge implicit biases in order to mitigate the effects.
Next, we have Jody Meyer.
I was reading an article recently about implicit bias, discussing the unconscious and split-second ways in which implicit bias operates. And when I think about that, I think about school discipline issues for a moment. And the more subjective your rules are, I think the more open to interpretation they are, and the more likely implicit bias is going to step in when making judgment calls about that, even without any intention. And so I think as a district, when it comes to decision making, and this is whether it's about students or employees or really any category, is we need to be making criteria for decision making as objective as possible, rather than relying on subjective factors, which I think is where the implicit bias would step in.
Next, we have Ariel Minor.
So I think everybody's in agreement that implicit bias is a thing and that it's everywhere and it's in all of us and it's certainly in our schools. I think education is the first thing we can do. Maybe we need to put some curriculum in our schools about implicit bias and make sure that we celebrate our differences, that we are exposed to people who speak differently, look differently, act differently. I think that if we're going to have police in our schools, we need to have some really intense implicit bias training that is continual and ongoing. And I think that the more that we hold events that bring us together in all parts of our city, the more we can decrease implicit bias in our community.
Next, we have Shannon Kimball.
So of course it exists because it exists within our society, and as a school board and as a district, we have to take steps to disrupt the impact of that in our schools. This is work that our district has been doing, and I've been leading an advocate for that work on the board. I helped co-author the district's equity policy. I've supported efforts to equitably distribute resources, access to technology, expansion of coursework for our students, and paying tuition for the students who need support to access it. Implementing restorative practices so that we reduce racial disparities in our discipline data, expanding access to high-quality early childhood opportunities through Kennedy Early Childhood Center, New York Montessori, partnerships with others in the community. So there are lots of things that we are doing. I think it's also important, though, to understand what our district actually looks like. For example, the 3 schools in our district that have the highest enrollment of minority students in them are actually Schwegler, Sunflower, and let me make sure I gave you the right school, Hillcrest. It's important to understand what this district looks like as a whole in order to be able to have an impact on this issue within our schools.
Next, we have Carol Cadu Blackwood.
Thank you. In my day job as a social worker at the Kansas City Indian Center, one of the perks of my job is is it on? Let me see. Hopefully that doesn't affect my time. Oh, it's not on. Can everybody hear me? I don't know what's going on with my microphone. But in my day job, one of the perks is that I get to provide diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings for the University of Kansas Medical Center. But I'm also a product of Lawrence Public Schools. I obtained my public education K through 12. I have an associate's from Haskell, a bachelor's from the University of Kansas, and a degree, a master's in social welfare from the University of Kansas with a clinical focus. But I experienced race racism as a youth in Lawrence Public Schools. I was told by one of my teachers in grade school that I would never finish. She told me in front of the class that I would never finish it. She said, "I bet a dollar you'll never finish high school." And later on in high school, one of my teachers referred to me as chief and told me that was a term of endearment. And even today, as I sit here on this board, I've heard microaggressions such as a low man on a totem pole, and just last week I heard somebody complain to me that somebody said that they were going to have a powwow instead of using the word meeting. So these things still exist today, and yes, I agree with Rachel that we do need a reporting system because this is happening today. Thank you.
Next, we have G.R. Gordon Ross.
The district offers a lot of different ways to address this. One of the things that the district has done for I think close to 2 decades is an in-person multi-day training called Beyond Diversity that it offers to all staff. And I think at this point, after almost 2 decades, it's almost time that we go beyond that because we've done that. We've also implemented a new curriculum for our students as well this year, but I think it's important as we do that, it's called Character Strong to also help with that as well. But I think it's important that we do the work individually. We have to make sure that our actions have a positive impact. When we make a mistake, that we own it, that we apologize for it, that we're always learning and growing. That we make sure that we have representation anytime we're making decision making and that the right people are at the table and that we maintain our commitment to making every decision through the equity lens that we've always done within this district.
Next we have Yolanda Franklin.
Implicit bias is described as a form of bias that occurs automatically and unintentionally, but nevertheless, it affects judgments, decisions, and behaviors. It should not play a role in our education system, but it does. From how discipline actions are handed out to how a student is perceived with the way they are dressed. There is no simple solution for this. For this is a learned behavior. So we have to start at the top. We need more color on the school board. We need to present opportunities for students and staff to engage in discussions within safe environments. And we also need to spend more time with people outside of our usual social groups.
Next, we will have question number 5. What are the biggest challenges facing our public schools and how would you address those challenges? We will start with Brandon Moore.
Number one challenge is that we are having a staffing crisis in our school district. Our staff does not feel important, understood, or energized, which are my big 3 that I've lived with throughout my career. We've lost a record number of staff over the last several years. Most of you have seen in the Journal World and the Lawrence, Kansas Times, they're writing editorials in saying exactly how unhappy and unappreciated they've felt. I agree that the board did do a lot this last year to give raises out. It wasn't enough, and they still feel unsupported. I was asked to run by staff members to be able to make change. We need to do more to make sure that not only the staff is paid well, but that they feel supported. They need to make sure that they feel supported by the admin staff and by the community that supports them.
Next, we have Ann Costello.
I think the top three challenges are all connected. First, as I previously mentioned, we need the legislature to fund our schools at an appropriate level and stop trying to divert money from public schools into private schools under the guise of school choice and vouchers. Second, we need to be able to retain and attract great staff. In order to do so, our salaries need to be competitive, we need to pay our classified staff a living wage, and our class sizes need to be reduced. This all takes money. Next, we must close the achievement gap for students of color, students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and students receiving special education services. Teacher turnover can have an impact on this achievement, and if we can stabilize that, it will help our students. Instruction should be student-centered. We should encourage students who have not traditionally taken more rigorous coursework to take those classes. Parental involvement can also have a positive impact on student achievement. As such, we must foster closer cooperation between parents and schools. The past few years have caused our community to lose trust in the district, and we must work to build that back. The easiest way is to improve transparency in our decision making.
Next, we have Jody Meyer.
This was a pretty broad question that was asked. It was the biggest challenges facing our public schools. Generally speaking, regarding public schools, I think the biggest challenge is not having consistency in funding or adequately being funded, as has been determined by the Kansas Supreme Court. The last 20 years have been fraught with legislative fights and litigation over school funding. As a practicing attorney myself, I read the decisions, and it's kind of embarrassing, the back and forth that's gone on. But to the extent that we can't control a lot of that, I do think that as board members that we could provide testimony and help our legislators advocate, but that is largely beyond our control. I think on a more micro level, I think we are talking about quality of life for staff and teachers. I do think we're talking about lower class size. As somebody who substitute teaches occasionally, which I did a couple weeks ago prior to my foot injury, it makes a big difference having a middle school classroom with 30-some kids in it. Try it. It's not for the faint of heart. And taking care of the discipline issues in school. At the high school level right now, they're pretty severe.
Next, we have Shannon Kimball.
Ariel.
Ariel Meyer, sorry.
I think one of the biggest challenge we have is that our state legislature is pushing school choice, vouchers, privatization initiatives, and I believe that our local school district leaders also share those initiatives, and that is why our teachers and our principals and our staff are fleeing this district. I think it's very important that we elect local school board members that understand this problem so that we can grow a movement of school board members across Kansas who also understand this problem, so that everyday Kansans understand this problem, that we need to fight for our legislators, elect representatives at the state level who will fully fund our public education in Kansas, because our children deserve it.
Next, we have Shannon Kimball.
All right, I want to say with absolute clarity that I do not share any initiatives to privatize public education, and in fact, I have been fighting against them pretty aggressively through all different kinds of avenues in my work for the past decade. In fact, just this week I was in Topeka on Tuesday at a hearing where a lot of this was being featured by our legislative leadership, and I would encourage all of the candidates on the stage to go back and watch that hearing so that you can understand exactly how hard this fight is that's going on in Topeka. And that is the fight that is going to be the biggest challenge that we face as a district, because everything they are doing over there really impacts what we are able to do here for our students and our staff and our families. So I'm going to keep doing that work just as I have been doing. I do not believe that any of our district leadership is involved in or shares any efforts to privatize our schools. The teacher pipeline is another area that I think is going to be a big challenge for us. There's been almost a 35% decrease in the number of people entering teacher prep programs. we have to adjust our practices to address that.
Next we have Carol Cadu Blackwood.
In my 3.5 years on the board, I have a greater understanding of school funding and its impacts on the community. Our budget shows our priorities 100%. It has been my experience that the budget office makes a presentation to tell us board members, to tell us why we need to use a budget formula that is comparable to other districts. We close schools based on these presentations. Just this week, as Jody Meyer had said, the Kansas Legislature Special Committee on Education honed in on a July 2023 legislative audit that examined how schools used more than $400 million in at-risk funding during the 2021 school year. A sample of 20 Kansas's nearly 300 public schools districts found that schools have misspent approximately 30% of the $5.2 million in at-risk expenditures reviewed by auditors on other allowable expenses. Auditors emphasized they could not project the percentage of misspent funds to the broader pool of at-risk funding in Kansas. To that end, we need to look at how to invest in schools that are underperforming and educate ourselves and the public on school finance before we rely on other districts' budget formulas.
Next we have G.R. Gordon Ross.
I think the two biggest challenges facing us are closing the opportunity gap and supporting our LGBTQIA+ students. I think any work that we can do to close that opportunity gap impacts all students, because any of that work that we do impacts across the board. So looking at that data, interviewing those students, talking to them, getting their input on how we can close that gap impacts everybody. And then our school district, every building, every place needs to be someplace where every student feels loved, supported, and welcomed. And the work that we can do within the walls of our buildings to address and counter the effects of SB 180 is vital. It's going to take, everyone is going to take a lot of work, but it's vital work because it's, in the end, it could save a life.
Next we have Yolanda Franklin.
I agree with everyone else about the funding and the challenges. I believe one of our biggest challenges is that we're not preparing our students for real life. Yes, we have the highest graduation rate, but what does that mean when they're not properly prepared for life? Can they balance a checkbook? Do they know how to fill out a job application? Can they hold down a job? Especially our minority students who don't have access to all resources. They have access to few resources. So our minority students' lives are impacted from the time that they graduate from high school. So that's our biggest challenge, is that we need to start preparing our children for real life.
Next we have Rachel Stumbling Bear.
I also echo that the funding is one of our hugest challenges, not getting the adequate funding so that we can pay our teachers adequately, so that we can fund our special education needs. I also think that here in this district, the district has not done a very good job showing the programs that it is doing. We're not seeing actually what is happening in the district. And I'm not talking necessarily the negative things, I'm also talking about the positive things. We recently had an article about our media specialist who has won an award. How many people knew about that before that article came out? So I think that we have a big perception issue in the city that we don't always know what is going on, or we follow human nature and we only look at the negative.
Next we will go to the last question, question 6. What would you like to say in closing? We will start with Ann Costello.
I am dedicated to justice and equality for all members of our community, including students and staff. If elected, I will work to actively promote equality and inclusivity by addressing achievement gaps, reducing disparities in resources and opportunities, and creating a safe and welcoming environment for all students, regardless of their race, gender, socioeconomic status, etc. Providing equitably distributed funding that supports the needs of all students, including those with diverse learning abilities and backgrounds, is a critical responsibility of the board when overseeing the allocation of financial resources, and is something I fully support. I want to ensure that we incorporate diverse perspectives and experiences into our curriculum to ensure that students are exposed to a wide variety of voices and ideas. I will champion policies that protect and support our LGBTQ+ students, ensuring that they have access to safe spaces and resources. I will promote a zero-tolerance policy for bullying and harassment in our schools, ensuring that all students and staff feel safe and respected. I will support efforts to increase diversity and representation among school staff and leadership positions. I will actively listen to the concerns and experiences of students, staff, and parents from marginalized communities and use that feedback to inform policies and decision-making. I will continue to advocate for equitable funding, resources, and opportunities in our schools, especially those in underserved communities. My commitment to justice and equality extends to all members of our community, and I will work to create an educational system that is fair, inclusive, and free from oppression in any form. Thank you.
Next we have Jody Meyer.
I guess I'm a bit more of a realist when it comes to these issues, and I'm more interested in focusing on practical solutions instead of, I think there's a lot of talk of vague generalities. You know, I've had 3 kids in Lawrence Public Schools, 2 of whom are at KU now, 1 is at high school level, and I substitute teach. I don't want to keep harping on that, but the things that you observe when you're a teacher, even as a substitute teacher, by being present in the classroom, by seeing them, by talking to other teachers, lets you know what is happening in the schools. Kindergarten classes of 30-some kids who in some ways have been behind because of being online during COVID. I mean, this learning loss that we've had, and it's real. You talk to the teachers, it's real. We can't continue educating like we have in the past. With increased class sizes, I think that's going to hamper that. I don't know if the solution is to get more pairs in a classroom to help out with teachers. The middle schools, I think, are actually particularly bad with the overload of kids in classrooms and the discipline issues. I think to some degree we ought to look at perhaps putting another secondary building administrator in the building. It's literally whack-a-mole with problems in the building. I mean, they're spending their time, the principal and assistant principal, on dealing with what's on fire that day. And then when we get to the high school level, we've got kids having sex at school, we've got vaping rampant, we've got fist fights. I just watched 2 videos of fist fights at Lawrence High last week. And kids are not able to focus when they have all these other things going on at school. And that's the type of thing that we need to focus on like a laser beam. Getting kids from being truant, being at school, and then we can work on improving the academics. That's it at the end of the day for me.
Next we have Ariel Minor.
In closing, I would just like to say that when I first decided to run, all the problems felt just huge, and I felt pretty alone. But I joined Kansas United for Public Schools, which is the grassroots movement to work to get our schools fully funded, and I certainly feel less alone, and that it's actually possible to solve some of these huge problems that underlie our underfunding of our schools. We need to have more equitable resources among our district. We have to use the power of people, and that means that we need everybody to join Kansas United for Public Schools, because what we have been doing is not working. It's going to take more than one person. It's going to take all of the organizations that we have in Lawrence working together to get our schools fully funded, because that's how we're going to get the resources to our children in our classrooms.
Next we have Shannon Campbell.
Lawrence is one of the greatest places in Kansas to live and raise your family. It's why I had him here. It's why I have been a proud parent of USD 497 students for many years. Our values of equity and diversity are evident in our community and in our schools. And I believe that every student in our community and every family deserves a top-notch education. And that is something I believe to my core, and it's why I have served and why I hope to continue to serve on this board. We faced a lot of challenges in the last few years. I have tried very hard to be a voice of stability, of honesty, and of real solutions at the board table. I've worked hard with groups in Lawrence, Educate Lawrence, and across the state. Game On for Kansas Schools, KASB, KNEA, USA Kansas. There are all kinds of groups out there doing this work to advocate for the needs of our students and students everywhere, and I am a part of that, and I will continue to be a part of that. Because doing what is best for every student and every family, as well as our staff, is what has to happen. Our work has to be informed by a deep understanding of our district and the challenges that we face, but also the possibilities going forward. We've made progress despite these challenges, and I'm really proud of that work. There are good things having your support and your vote on November 7th. Thank you for being here today. Thank you to NAACP, Loud Light, and Black 30 for offering this opportunity for all of us.
Next, we have Carol Perdue-Wood.
Thank you. I would like to thank the Lead Center and Loud Light, the NAACP, and Hy-Vee for providing this beautiful building today. We need to take a deep dive into the budget and see where we can provide better wages for our staff. We need to have a robust public school boundary conversation so we can all move forward at the speed of trust. This doesn't mean that the school will be closed, but that we need to reconfigure how to best use our school sites to work for smaller class sizes. We need to work on creating a tax incentive policy that holds companies or businesses accountable to make sure that it benefits the community. We cannot continue to give away thousands or potentially millions of dollars to companies and not get anything out of it. I have worked with vulnerable populations and recognize the need for mental health supports. We've heard time and time again during the school closure process that mental health was cited. We will continue to hear about classroom overcrowding. We can redistribute students to schools that need students and staff. Whenever we make the decision to give out tax incentives, close schools, and raise the mill levy, we tell the community they are not worthy. These are big decisions that contribute to disparate outcomes. I did not run to close schools. I've been here in Lawrence since 1978, and I'm not going anywhere. I want to continue my work for public education at the local, state, and national level to lift up our public schools. And I'm proud to be alongside such a shoulder to shoulder with members from the Kansas United for Public Schools. Thank you, miigwech.
Next, we have G.R. Gordon Ross.
I firmly believe in the power of public education because I'm the product of public education. My mom served on a school board when I was in middle school and high school and set a great example to me of what it means to be a public servant and to serve your community. I believe in public education because of the opportunity that my kids have had in this school district. My wife and I have 5 children, 3 of which are a product of this school system and 2 of which are at Lawrence High School. And they have been afforded incredible opportunities, and I've spent 5 years on the school board working and fighting to make sure that every student in this district can and has the opportunity to receive those same opportunities. I'm also a big believer in the power of local elections. Local elections are the bedrock of our democracy, and I thank you for being here because your vote matters. Participating in local elections is a significant thing that you can do. During my almost 5 years on the board, I've had the opportunity to work on the boundary committee and the negotiations committee and the facilities committee. And the work that I've been able to do there is to help work on the opportunity gap and also to work on staff wages. I'm asking for your support on November 7th to continue the work that I've done to support staff, to work on increasing wages, to provide them the space and the materials that they need, and to continue to provide students with what they need to find success after graduation.
Next, we have Yolanda Franklin.
We need to be building a grassroots movement that will include teachers, staff, students, parents, and all the community members to make a real, true, everlasting change starting here in Lawrence. We have got to work together to get the change we're wanting for our children. There's never been an I in team, but there is one in united. So it's going to take more than one person lobbying at the State House. It's going to take more than one person sitting in a meeting with the governor. What's it going to take? It's going to take a community working together as one to get the community level change done that we need so desperately here in Lawrence. I am here. I am willing to work. I'm working with the CUPS movement, and I will continue to work. And I want everyone to join us in getting us to the place I know we can reach as a Lawrence community.
Next, we have Rachel Stumbling Bear.
This past April, I chose to run because I realized that I needed to put my foot where my mouth is, put action into place. I strongly believe in public education. I know that learning is a lifelong skill, and it's a skill that is first gained during these years, kindergarten through 12th. So if we are not reaching our students to start learning the skill so that they can enjoy to learn, then as they go off into life, they're not going to be prepared. When they have questions, when they're outside of their parents' homes, they might not know who to ask. And I think that that's really what is motivating me, is I want to go back to the students and find out what are they needing. I come from a family who believes in service. My father is an Air Force veteran. My mom retired as a para-educator. And continually to this day, they are still serving well into their 70s. I became interested in the Lawrence Public Schools when my stepson came to live with us, and he started high school. That's when I kind of started learning and following the school board. I now have a 1-year-old granddaughter who will be in our school district here in a short few years, and I want to make sure that our schools are ready for her. Thank you.
Next, we have Brandon Moore.
I got a lot to say, so I got to talk quick. We all know that there's a lot that needs to change in order for Lawrence to get back to having a best-in-class school district. The board should be the voice of its electorate. We should be hearing from you, the students and the teachers, not through surveys. We need to be accountable for each of our votes. There should be a record online sharing each board member's votes on every single issue. Dr. Lewis gets paid $230,000 per year. Teachers make anywhere between $42,000 to start at $77,000 at a max. Dr. Lewis receives 20 vacation days, 12 sick days, and 11 federal holidays for a total of 33 days off per year. I don't know about you, but I'd like to have a month off every single year. Also, the board chose to extend an additional $9,000 directly to his 403B this year so that it wouldn't show up as a salary increase. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. There were 2 resignations in the last 18 months on the board, and this board members specifically said they chose to 2 replacements because they had previous school board experience with this board, and I would say this should not be a good old boys club. We need fresh, new ideas to be able to make the change because the ideas that they have don't work.